Today's episode is brought to you by Dorrington Plumbing, Gas and Electrical, and they provide quality-focused specialists for both residential and commercial plumbing, gas and electrical services. They've been doing this since 1995 and have built up a substantial reputation within the sector. If you're interested in these services, head to www.dorringtonplumbing.com.au.
Hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull podcast. Joining me in the studio today is Steve Stone, the Executive Chair of Castle Minerals, which is listed on the ASX under code CDT. Now, they've just made a few announcements, realistically, the previous week by the time this comes out, but there's been quite a bit of activity and news flow regarding some activity within the company and some new projects. So we'll go through that. But firstly, welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be here.
If we start a little bit, I always like to figure out who I'm sitting in the room with. And I remember watching you do a presentation. It would have been 12 months ago now. And I finally now managed to get you in the room through a few different conversations. But when you were talking then, I was infatuated with a lot of the story of the company. But before we go there, just give us a little bit of background in yourself and how you've developed and grown within the mining space and how it's gotten you to be at Castle Minerals.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm obviously born just outside London, and I went to Cardiff University and studied mining geology there. And when I graduated, it was quite interesting. There was no really jobs in the industry, and I managed to get a job in Zambia. And I went to work there for a year, and I worked as a mining geologist on the big underground copper mines. And I ended up spending 6 years there. I just loved it, and it was an amazing apprenticeship into the industry. And I learned lots of things, particularly around the production side of the business, that I've never forgotten and have always, kept me in good stead. And then I floated a company out of London actually, but we raised money in London in '86, but we did it from a base in Kalgoorlie. We put a company together called Dragon Mining, which is still going actually. It's now active in Sweden and Finland. So that's been a very good story. The fact that it's still going, not many survive that long. And we did that from Kalgoorlie, and we floated that, interestingly, just a week before the '87 crash, literally a week when everything just changed.
Beautiful timing. Overnight.
And that was a very, very dramatic change. And it was quite interesting because at the time people were expecting the gold price to collapse, not the market. I think the gold price was in the 700s, and that was, a phenomenal amount in those days. But it was the whole market just collapsed and bang. And it wasn't like a slow burn like we've been seeing perhaps in this market. Yeah, it was just very sudden. And then it came back, of course, as they always do. So I ran Dragon for several years and then got involved in some other companies, floats and sort of corporate work. And cut a long story short, I ended up running a company called Azuma Resources, which had a lot of good ground actually in northern Ghana. And we took that from nothing to a resource base of about 2.5 million ounces and a reserve of well over about 1.2 million ounces. And then that got taken over by our private equity partner at the time. And during my tenure at Azuma, which was a great story, and it went really well. And I built up a stake in Castle Minerals on behalf of Azuma. So when it got taken over, I effectively brought Azuma's stake in Castle. I was already running Castle, so I just stayed here. And what we're trying to do now is trying to replicate the success of Azuma with Castle. All our ground pretty much is in the same area, same rocks, and same sort of anomalies, and just that same really good feel about being able to make a discovery. So that's how I ended up here in the studio today, I suppose.
Yeah, fair. And I mean, from the sounds of it, you've been working in West Africa and Africa probably as a whole for probably an extended period of time throughout your career. I mean, how have you seen that whole mining evolution of projects and just the, I guess, approaches of the different sort of countries within Africa sort of evolve over that sort of, 20 odd years?
Yeah, well, on the macro scale for the junior resources companies, which is the space I've always worked in, it's been a roller coaster. I've worked in Western Australia, done quite a lot in China as well, but I suppose Africa gets in your blood. And I was after being in Zambia for several years, I was very happy to be working in Ghana. Africa's 50 4 countries. So a bit like Europe, it's a very diverse sort of continent, and each company has its own peculiarities. But the opportunities to make discoveries in Africa are phenomenal. Ghana is Africa 101. It's one of the best places, and it's a very stable country. It's got a Westminster government system. In fact, it's got an election coming up in December the 7th. And when they've had previous elections and change of governments, it's always been a very smooth transition. And all the big foreign powers have their embassies in Accra to service the whole of West Africa. So it just says a lot about what they think about Ghana. And it's got a 80, 90-year mining history. There's some very big world-class mines there operated by Newmont, Goldfields, Anglo Gold Ashanti, Perseus are there. So it's a nation with a long history of mining. So yeah, there's lots of places to go in Africa, lots of really good stories. You just got to focus where you focus. But it is a continent of opportunity. And West Africa, very much so, produces more gold. And if you look at the greenstone belts in West Africa, which is the rocks that you find the gold in, like you do in WA, it's a much similar sort of area, but very, very prolific in terms of discoveries. A lot more discoveries there in the last 10 years than in Western Australia, and it produces a lot more gold than the whole of Australia. And interestingly, Ghana is now the #1 gold producer in Africa after, so it's knocked South Africa off the
Jeez. Okay. And
off the podium, yeah.
That kind of brings the conversation to why we're here, which is talking about the new project or new package that Castle Minerals has brought into the portfolio. So talk us through a little bit about the history of the WA project and just a little bit of the lineage as to, we were saying before off air how these things just happen. They pop up on the ASX and everyone's like, oh, it's an instant thing. But the transaction, the due diligence and the work to get to this point takes a substantial amount of time. So yeah, if you'd mind elaborating a bit on how this came across your desk as a way and sort of what sort of boxes were ticked enough for this sort of project to go ahead.
Well, that's correct. I mean, it is a long journey to get where you are today. So this project was originally owned by Newmont, and it was a massive license called a retention license. And when Castle acquired it, it got broken up into a lot of sub-licenses. There's something like 12,000 square kilometres, massive. And Castle, over the years and under my tenure, has sort of reviewed all that ground, and we've shed a lot of ground, and we're probably down about 2,500 square kilometres, which is still massive. And we'll probably let a bit more ground go as we get more familiar with what's going on. So it's been a long process of review, going out there, banging the rocks, taking surface samples in particular, to get to where we are today. Now, what's interesting is we call it the Wa Gold Project because the main town there is called Wa. And it's in the northern Ghana. It's quite remote, and it was a place where people didn't think there was any gold. Zuma's story has proved that there is, and you're probably familiar with Cardinal as well. And so there's a mine just about to be commissioned there now. So there is a lot of gold there to be found. So the Castle story is that we've got this big Wa Gold Project, but within that there's a lot of sub-projects. And the Kipali project, which is the one that's been featuring in the news recently, is one area. And it's really interesting because it's an area where there's no old workings. You wouldn't know there was any gold there. There's no outcrop. It's all soil covered. So the previous management, they thought, well, hang on a minute. We can see that there's 2 greenstone belts merged there, and there's 3 massive sort of semi-continental scale structures merged there. We've got to go and look there. So they did, and they did a lot of geochemistry, and lo and behold, they came up with a lot of anomalies, and then they started drilling, and they made a number of discoveries, including Kipali. And it was great work by the previous management, and we're building on that now. So we think that the Kipali area, where you've got this focal point of these greenstone belts and the structures, is actually could be another mining camp, a West African mining camp. You tend to get sort of clusters of deposits. The rocks are very similar to Western Australia. So a geologist from WA would go out to Kipali and think, oh, this looks very familiar. The style of mineralisation, the way the deposits are formed is very similar. And there's just a methodology you now have to go through to try and prove up whether there is something. There's there's a big discovery to be made, and that's what we're doing. And it requires a very systematic approach to sampling and drilling, knowing how to take the samples, know how to understand them and interpret them before you drill. There isn't a shortcut. You've just got to go through that process, and you need money to do that. So we've just raised 1.25 million this week to continue that story. And fingers crossed, we hope that we've latched onto something. And outside of Kapali, there's half a dozen other prospects where we think there's a lot of opportunity as well. But you're obviously limited by the capital you've got, so you've got to keep continually prioritising where you do your work.
So then with Kapali, if I'm saying that correctly, again, the indication already is that there's been a fair bit of work done. So what are the next steps now that you've got the cash in the bank and the project's yours? How are you going to, again, go through that systematic approach to proof up some more results and start painting this picture that there is potentially an enormous discovery there?
Been done. So really it's drill. You won't find anything sitting in the office, poring over maps and playing around with this and that and software. At the end of the day, you've got to go out and drill the holes. And each hole's like a lottery ticket. And the more holes you drill, the more chances you've got of winning that lottery. Yeah.
Okay, and then is there a timeline as to when that sort of, I guess, process might start? And are there any, like you could say, working with Ghana, are there any sort of local community approvals that need to be put in place as well? I mean, how are those sort of conversations? I wouldn't know because a lot of the conversations in WA and Australia, it's all based on getting those regulatory processes done first and make sure that ticked off. So what's the perspective like in Ghana and there?
Well, it starts yesterday. I mean, we've been planning what we're going to do before you get them funds.
Yes.
You obviously have to do that. It's raining there at the moment. They have a rainy season, which everybody takes a bit of a break. So we'll probably hopefully get out drilling sort of sometime in December. Just depends on things. But it is so easy to get a drilling program up and running there. Rigs are very available, really good quality drillers. We've got a good relationship with a company called Geodrill. We've done a drill for equity transaction with them, so we can pay for some of the drilling in shares. I've used Geodrill for many, many years, and they're so reliable. If anything breaks down, it's fixed the next day, and you get a very good sample. Not plugging them, but it's just so good to have something like that available in Africa. Then in terms of just getting people, our geologists there are as good as anybody else in the world. They really know their stuff. They know what to do. We can mobilise them very, very quickly. In terms of community, very good point. We do have projects in WA, and we've just found it really difficult to operate here. The native title process is a long process. It's quite costly for a small company. Things don't happen in what we would call commercial timeframes. I mean, junior companies have to be nimble.
Yes.
Your shareholders want news flow, and you lose their attention if you just take too long to do things, and you're just not in control of some of these things. So we actually find it a lot easier to operate in Ghana. That says a lot.
Yeah.
And that's essentially why we're focused there. Yeah. And the community there, these are very, very poor people. It's where your World Vision money goes. They don't even have they don't have taps in their homes. They have a well if they're lucky. So they really appreciate anybody who comes along and says, look, we're hoping to find a mine. We might be able to create jobs. You've got to be careful not
to overpromise.
Yeah, you've got to manage expectations and timeframes. And we employ as many people as we can locally, always. So a lot of these people don't have jobs. They're subsistence farmers. So I've been working there for years, spent a lot of time talking to the village chiefs, the paramount chiefs, and they're lovely people, and they're very, very accommodating.
And I want to go back to when you were talking about the structure of the green belt and I guess the uniqueness of this, and if it probably was in Australia back in the day, it would have been already well and truly mined to its end. What is so beneficial about having this sort of system on your tenement package, and I guess the uniqueness of the way that they're blending and what that really means for a novice that's going, okay, there's a few different zones. What does that really mean from a potential of gold?
Look, we've just we just tick all the boxes in terms of where you would hope to make a discovery, whether it's in Ghana or the rest of West Africa or other green stone belts in the world. So it's just really, it is what we call a very, very fertile area. Nothing's guaranteed. You have to drill the holes. You might think you're onto the best thing, and then the hole comes up a dud, so you then go to the next area. That's exploration. That's the excitement. I mean, we are a junior company. We're a speculative investment, and that's the fun of what we fun side of what we do. You know, it's very exciting. Some of us are very successful, and some of us maybe moderately successful, and some of us don't kick the goals, and you have to move on or you have to reinvent yourself. Yeah. But that's what's great about our industry. It's very dynamic.
And you mentioned again prioritising capital, and I've spoken with numerous small cap companies about that exact thing, that you can't go and test and drill everything because you've got to be very strategic with how you target. But I mean, in the back of your mind, you must already be looking at just the full spread of what you got on a bunch of other areas that you'd like to further explore. Was there any other work done on some of these areas, or is it completely clean slate? You've just got to go out there and do a bit more work, which therefore doesn't put it at the top of the hierarchy because there's a lot more work that needs to go into it before you get any sort of
There's a lot of money being spent over the years, and it's been spread over a big area. I suppose the hard groundwork's done in terms of, trying to identify those areas where you've got the best chance of discovery. So it's not like it's an absolutely greenfields area. We've got a lot of information we can build on, and that's exactly what we're doing. So outside of Kipali, we've got 2 or 3 other areas that have had some drilling. There's some really good intersections on them, pretty wide space. So we need to go in there and do some more drilling and understand exactly what's going on. You just have to follow up everything. So when I was running Azuma, I mean, they've got that 2.7 million ounce resource. That's not just one big deposit. It's an amalgam of several deposits, as you often see in the goldfields in WA. So it's exactly like that. So, and these things, when you find them, they don't start at surface and peter out. They go down for hundreds of metres. So if you look at the cross sections of some of the big mines and discoveries in West Africa, they all start off with squibbly little bits on surface, and a lot of them just get better and better and better as you get deeper. So you mustn't give up. You've got to keep chasing things, and there's some great stories in West Africa of where tenacious explorers have really delivered the goods. Yeah.
And you touched on it a little bit, but Ghana has got such a rich history within mining, and many may or may not be aware of that. But I mean, within your dealings, I mean, what sort of incentives and benefits do they sort of encourage, especially international groups coming in? And I can imagine facilitating local communities and helping them is part of the priority there. But clearly, they're quite on board with helping and bringing those companies in to then benefit the larger community. I mean, how is it working? Like the relationships with the government, and is there local, or is it just main head honcho in the centre town, and they sort of control everything? I wouldn't really know where to start, and I can't imagine they've got the local governments like we've got in WA.
Good question. There's the famous Western mining geologist Roy Woodall. I went to a talk he did in Namibia actually, and it was called The Borderless World. And he said, look, we're a big company. We can go and explore anywhere in the world. If you want us to come to your country, you need to make it attractive for us in terms of data availability and fiscal regime. So Ghana is one of those countries that's gone to a lot of trouble to attract the investment dollar. And look, companies like Cote d'Ivoire are very popular at the moment. People like to go to Tanzania, Botswana, because they've gone to a lot of effort in Namibia to make it attractive for people to go there. What's happening in Africa, though, it is going through a lot of change. The view is now these are our minerals, these are our commodities. We'll invite you here. You're our guest. You're welcome to come here, but we want a bigger share of the proceeds than we may have had in the past. You can't just take the money and run
and leave us in the same state that we have.
And we want to see you adding value in country if you can. And isn't that a familiar story in Australia? Is it? Try and add value in country rather than just export.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a strong theme in Africa now. And there's a lot of change in fiscal regimes and the approach of governments towards exploration and mining. And you have to navigate your way through that. And that's fine, as long as it works. So when you do make a discovery, as long as it all adds up from your point of view, you're happy to share the proceeds. Of course you are. But you don't want it to get to a point where your shareholders will say, well, hang on a minute, we're giving you all this money, we're taking all the risk. Somebody else is getting a risk-free carry. It doesn't work for us. We're either not going to give you any money or we're going to invest in another country. So I think they're aware of that as well. And so there's a balance to be had. But it's definitely changing in Africa. And Ghana's amazing, actually. They have a fund, and this is topical because that's what we've just announced this week, called the Minerals Income Investment Fund, which is very innovative. And they basically collect all the royalties from the big gold mines and all the other mining in Ghana. And instead of going into the general account and, Ghana's...
Accruing interest or whatever
sort of getting lost in all other sort of budgets, it's actually kept in this fund. And the mandate is to reinvest that money back into resources for the betterment of the population at large. And that's not just mining projects. They're looking at building a gold refinery. They're looking at doing gold ETFs. They're looking at some really interesting things. And it's a $500 million fund. And it's just going to get bigger and bigger as it collects more and more royalties. So we've been lucky enough to engage with them. They've shown a lot of interest in our graphite project. And this week we announced what we call a non-binding indicative term sheet. So it's an intention for them to put some money into Castle and to put some money directly into our graphite project. So the story with the graphite is it was there amongst all the gold licenses, and previous management dusted it off when the graphite price went through the roof and said, look, this is quite a decent deposit. And then the graphite price came down, so it went to sleep.
Handballed it elsewhere.
2 years ago, I dusted it off again. We did a lot more drilling. We've done a lot of metallurgical work, and it's really, really come up trumps. It's a nice 24 million tonnes, 8.6%, what they call sort of carbon or graphite, which is pretty good in the world basis. Some of it's 20, 30%. And it's got a really good chance of becoming a graphite mining operation. So the government said, well, we'd like to be involved in that. And one of the interesting drivers is, and this all comes to what's changing in Africa, is there's a lithium discovery in Ghana by Atlantic Lithium. So they're saying, okay, we've got lithium, we've got graphite, we've actually got manganese, we've got available, reliable power, we've got ports, we've got 6 or 7 car assembly plants. Why don't we build our own battery manufacturing plant? Everybody's doing them in America and Europe. Let's do the first sub-Saharan battery manufacturing plant. So that's their vision, and that's been driven by the funds that are in this group called MIF. So that's that's the big picture where their investment or intended investment into Castle fits.
All right. So then if that all comes to head, then you're also getting some funding for the graphite side of it, and you've got funding for gold, funding for graphite. I mean, from your point of view, that must be quite exciting to then be able to go and do some more drilling as expected. But if we focus on the graphite real quickly, again, 2 years, you've developed that, the graphite, commodity prices, again, it's sort of fluctuated, but the EV, the electrification, the battery side of things are just ever growing. And to hear that they want to build their own battery manufacturing facility must be an incredible tailwind for that. But, how are you looking at slowly or progressing that project as well? And give us a little bit of the rundown of where that's located as well, because I can't imagine it's next door to your gold project, but...
Pretty much is.
Oh, there we go.
And
okay.
It's just right near the about 5 kilometres from the main airstrip in Wire. So it's brilliantly located. And it's I suppose it's got, we're sharing all the infrastructure that you would with a gold project. And it's an area that we're all familiar with, same sort of issues, same stakeholders. So it's something that can be easily advanced. So we've probably drilled it as much as we need to for quite a while. The resource risk is pretty much mitigated. So focus now will be taking all the data that we've done and putting it into a scoping study, then a pre-feasibility. So the money that MIFA will be investing is basically ring-fenced for that work. So it won't go on the gold; it'll just go on
The pre-feasibility
the graphite.
study,
But it means,
yeah.
from our shareholders' point of view, the graphite is funded for quite a long time, so that we can then focus on the gold. So if you're an investor in Castle, you've got two bites of the cherry. You've got a pretty much self-funded graphite project, and you've got a really good exploration project. And in my view, as any managing director would say, they're more than account individually for the market cap of the company, which is very, very modest, and there's a lot of value compressed into Castle's market cap. And what we're trying to do now, and I think with the deal with MIF and the capital raising, we're going to let the genie out of the bottle, and I think we should hopefully unlock and see a lot of appreciation in the market cap in the next 6 to 12 months. So that's the sort of high-level strategy that we're following, and there should be really good news flow coming from that. Yeah.
Talk to us about the team that's surrounding you and sort of a little bit about their experience and who else joins you in, again, progressing and pushing this strategy.
Yeah. Well, we've got a small team, and look, the whole approach is to keep things really, really lean. So all the money, as much of the money as you can, goes into drilling.
Yeah.
So that's the way I've always worked. So we have a pretty lean board. So there's myself, there's James Guy, who's been in the gold exploration and other mineral exploration, mainly in Australia, for most of his life. Ex-Rothschilds, who worked for them on the banking side, really, really knows his way around mining, exploration and minerals industry. He's fantastic. And then we've been recently joined by Matthew Horgan, who's come on as a non-executive director, but he's on the he's a business development and investor relations manager for Peak Rare Earths in Tanzania. So he's very familiar with Africa and all the processes that you have to go through with governments, and so we've got the benefit of that knowledge on our board as well. And that's it. Somebody from MIF, when they do invest, will be joining the board as a non-exec, and we're really looking forward to that because they've got some really, really good people there. So we think that will add another dimension to the company. And at the Ghanaian level, we've got two subsidiaries, one for the gold, one for the graphite. And on the graphite board, we've got David Renner, who was an executive at AngloGold Ashanti and ran a couple of mines in Ghana. So fantastic guy, a really good appointment, opens a lot of doors for us and helps us manoeuvre through various things in Ghana.
So then I can imagine you might get a little bit of time over Christmas, but really it's just everything go from now until, well, just continuously goes. But encapsulating a bit of the stuff that we talked about today, if a listener or viewer is going, what are some of the key takeaways of this conversation or things that they should remember about Castle Minerals, what would you say those key takeaways should be?
Well, just repeating myself, a lot of value compressed into a very small, more modest market cap, two really good projects. So you've got two bites of the cherry, both in very interesting and commodities, and a lot of news flow coming out of both of those projects to drive investor interest. And gold price is great at the moment, so we're obviously riding on the back of that. And the graphite price, that's come off a bit, but it's because of things going on in China with overproduction of cars and batteries. But everything we're seeing will say that perhaps overproduction slack will get taken up in the next year or two, and then there will be a big shortage because EV sales are still increasing. They might have slowed up, but there's going to be a huge demand for graphite because graphite's 30% of your EV battery. Yeah. And there just ain't enough of it, you know.
And speaking of news flow, I'm sure that, as most companies do, there's LinkedIn and Twitter. But, I mean, for those that want to follow and stay up to date with what's happening with Castle Minerals, I mean, where can they go and who can they contact? I'm sure if they probably email, there'd probably be yourself or one of the other board members getting back to them. But how can they go about contact you and asking questions?
Yeah, look, I'm always happy to take calls. I love talking to shareholders and potential investors. Go to our website and sign up for and newsletters. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on X. We're on all the platforms. We're obviously
doing podcasts now as well.
Podcasts with these sort of weird and wonderful companies. So we try very hard to get the message out there as broadly as as we can. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Steve, for speaking with me. Yeah, I allude back to it. When I heard you speak, I was quite captivated with the story, and that's already shifted a fair amount, but graphite is still part of it. But now this gold is the new chapter of where Castle Minerals is going. But yeah, thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing what happens, especially into the first half of 2025, and seeing some of these results come to the market and see what's happening in the West Africa region. But yeah, thank you for speaking on the show today.
Well, thanks very much, Ben. It's been really good chatting.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. Please remember that the topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial advice. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, share, and follow. You can follow the Market Bull on all our socials and keep up to date with global market insights.